Hey, what's going on guys? Caleb Wisted here, and today I'm going to be breaking down everything you need to know about walleye plastics. So a lot of you have already seen my jig head breakdown video. I'll leave a link below for that. That's going to pair up really well with this video. But I wanted to get into more of the plastic side of walleye angling. Plastics have become super popular in the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of guys have switched completely from using live bait to almost all plastics. My goal here is to make this the most comprehensive video on YouTube about walleye plastics, so you can go and pick out exactly what you need for your application next time you go shopping for some plastics for walleyes. So we're going to get started by covering what is important on a walleye plastic. We're going to go over body style, body shape, length, color, the plastic it's made from, and just kind of give you an overview of what you need to look for in a walleye plastic. And then we'll go into some applications on each style of plastic and how you can actually fish those plastics effectively so that you make sure you get the right ones for the way you like to fish. And stick around for the end of this video, because at the end I'm going to kind of give an overview of what I think is the most underrated plastic that a lot more walleye anglers should be fishing. Alright guys, let's get started by breaking down the 4 primary types of soft plastics that we will be using for walleyes in most applications. Let's start with the swim bait or the paddle tail. The reason I'm starting with this bait is it's become super popular, and there's a lot of misconceptions about paddle tails and how they really work. So a paddle tail swim bait is basically designed to move through the water and have tail kick as it's moved through the water. This flat tail catches water and it moves side to side and looks very much like a bait fish. Obviously walleyes eat a lot of bait fish, and it's a great imitation of bait fish in general. Length is super important because walleyes key on a certain length of forage. So I always match the length of the paddle tail to the forage that I think the walleyes are eating. So if they're eating 3-inch perch, I'll go with a 3-inch paddle tail. If I think they're eating 6-inch bluegills, I'm going to go with a much larger 6-inch paddle tail. The width of the bait also matters. The width is going to determine how much body roll and how much tail action are in that bait. So typically the thicker the plastic, the more body roll it's going to have, the more water it's going to push, and the slower it's going to fall. The thinner the tail section, the more tail kick it's going to have, and the more wiggle, and the slower you'll be able to fish that bait and still have tail action. Now this particular bait, this is one of my favorites for aggressive walleyes. This is the Berkley the Champ Swimmer. This is a fatter bodied swim bait. It moves a lot of water. It's got a lot of body roll to it and a big thump with this heavy tail. And you can swim it fairly fast with really good action. Now another great faster moving paddle tail with lots of action and thump is the Kitech Fat Impact Swing. And this is a great paddle tail for bass, but it also works really well for walleyes, and I've had a lot of luck for walleyes using this paddle tail. It's a little softer plastic and a little thinner. You can fish it a little bit slower than the Berkley, but it's got great action to it, and I really like that one. Now if I want to slow down even more and have more of a wiggle to it, I'll use one of these Bee Fish and Tackle swim baits. And these are great for river fishing early in the season when the water's cold, because they have a very soft plastic and a very thin tail, and you can move them really slow with this big wide tail, and they thump at very slow speeds, which is often how you have to retrieve these swim baits when the walleyes are more negative in the wintertime. And also one of the things on swim baits you have to pay attention to is the ribbing. So you'll see both of these swim baits have ribs on them. What that means is it can have a nice wide shad style looking profile, but it's also going to have freedom of movement for that tail to thump and to get some wiggle to it, because those ribs allow it to flex more like a worm than a solid plastic bait. So that's where you want to go to more of that wiggly, slower, softer plastic, is in that colder water when you want to move it slower. When it's warmer and the fish are more aggressive, go with more of that solid body style with a more of a body roll and a quicker tail thump, and you'll have a lot of luck. Now if I want to downsize even more and go more finessey and imitate even almost a buggy look to it, or a very small bait fish, I'm going to go with either the Eye Candy Paddle Shad or the Euro Tackle B-Vibe, 3-inch B-Vibe. My personal favorite is the 3-inch B-Vibe. I've just caught so many fish on this bait. Rig it on a smaller jig head. It's got a much thinner, longer tail section and a very small tail, which is going to give you a lot tighter and smaller, quicker paddles and less thump. and it's going to be more of a real quick swimming motion, more like a shiner would. And you can also drop shot these and get a lot of action out of them as well. You can move these both at pretty slow speeds, and the tails will kick on these baits. So before I get any further, I want to let you know I'm going to leave links for all this stuff down below so that you can pick up any of these baits I'm mentioning. I'm going to leave a whole list of them down there so that you can find them easily. So that pretty much covers swim baits. Now let's move on to the minnow bait category. So minnow baits have become very popular for walleyes as well. And they're actually really simple. They're just a straight-tailed, fork-tailed, minnow-shaped bait. And there's a few things you can do with them that work really, really well for walleyes, but they're fairly narrow in application. The main thing you want to know with minnow baits is the size. So again, you want to match the hatch. What are those walleyes eating? How big is it? How long is it? And then you can go into your technique of choice using the minnow bait. You know, they're all pretty similar. No matter what size you get, they're roughly the same shape, and they have that forked tail, and there isn't that much difference in the baits between each brand and style other than, you know, color and plastic they're made out of. So I'm not going to get too into that yet. Number 3 is going to be your straight-tailed worms. So straight-tailed worms are a great option when you want to imitate a bug or a leech. And a straight-tailed worm doesn't have much action on its own at all unless you impart the action to it. So whether that's by short, quick rod twitches or longer ups and downs, you're going to either get a wiggle out of it or you're going to get more of an undulation out of that bait. Again, great imitation for insect or leech eating walleyes that want more of that buggy look to them. Straight tail worms come in all different lengths from 2-inch all the way up to 6-inch or even 7 or 8-inch. But I'm typically going to be fishing somewhere between a 3 and 6-inch straight-tailed worm, depending on what I'm trying to imitate and how aggressive the walleyes are. And number 4 is the curly tail. So whether that's on a curly tail worm or on a shorter grub, that is going to impart action just to that part of the bait. So on a worm, you're going to get some of that undulation, and you're also going to get the flicker on just the back part of that little curly tail. And that's going to spin at really slow speeds, much slower than you're going to get out of the paddle tail or the swim bait. So it's a great option in colder water when you just want some action at slow speeds. And again, it can mimic almost anything in the water, like a minnow, a bug, some sort of insect or leech, almost anything. And it's kind of an old school bait, but they work really, really well, again, especially in colder water when you want less action, less aggressive action, but you still want that thing moving all the time, even when you're not imparting action to the bait yourself. All right, guys, so that pretty much covers the 4 styles and what you're looking for in those 4 styles of baits. Let's get into color a little bit. Some days they seem to want just a certain color and that's all they'll hit, and other days it doesn't seem to matter at all, but it can be a big factor. And typically what you're going to want to do is fish more clear, light, natural colors in clear water and more bright colored, darker colors in dark water. And that's because brighter colors and dark profiles tend to show up much better in stained water. And obviously more clear, lighter colors are going to look more natural to the fish in clear water. But that said, my 2 favorite colors for walleyes are chartreuse and purple. And if I can get a bait that has both on them, that's going to work in almost any condition. I really am a fan of purple and chartreuse together. Obviously, as you can see from a lot of these baits, they have those colors to them. Now, that said, if I'm going to fish really dark, dingy water, chartreuse is my favorite. Clear water, purple's my favorite. Mix and match as you want. I've had really good luck with those colors. Now, yellow is also another one. Orange is also another one, especially in perch and bluegill infested waters where these fish are eating these panfish that have a lot of yellows and oranges on them. And then obviously natural minnow colors where they're eating shiners, stuff with flake, light silvery flake or more clear see-through colors. Those work really well. And when it comes to worm or insect colors, I like just a green, maybe some blue or red in there mixed in, and then green pumpkin, black, more leechy natural insect looking colors are great on those worms. So that kind of breaks it down a little bit. There's a lot to color, experiment, and try different things. But if you go with a little purple and chartreuse, in my opinion, you almost can't go wrong. All right, guys, let's cover material. 90% of walleye plastics are going to be made out of plastisol, which is basically a soft plastic. And the plastisol can be added to make it more soft or less soft. So less soft baits are typically going to have a lot more wiggle to them, a lot more motion. And when you impart action on them, they're really going to wiggle. They're going to move very easily. A heavier plastisol is going to be a much more rigid bait, and it's going to allow for much jerkier actions without losing its shape, and it's going to cause more body roll on like a swim bait, for instance. And it should also be more durable, so it should last on the hook a little bit longer. Now there's another kind of plastic out there. It's called TPE, and the Northland Eye Candy series are made out of these. The Z-Man series baits are made out of this, and it's a very stretchy, pliable plastic, but it's also very durable. So I can really pull on this. These things are going to last you a long time. They're very flexible, so they're more for the flexible style baits applications. You don't necessarily want to use them in like a jerk minnow where you need that rigid plastic. But in a more flexible moving bait application, these things are great because they last forever, and they're very, very durable. So that's the basic types of plastic that these baits are made out of and kind of what to look for. All right, guys, so that's kind of a breakdown of the plastics themselves. Now let's get into some applications for these plastics. And again, we'll start with the paddle tail swim bait. Paddle tails are a very diverse style of bait. I'll fish these almost all year round. I'll have a swim bait tied on of some sort. Starting early in the year, I'm going to start with these very flexible ribbed swim baits, fish them really, really slow with that small tail section and a wide paddle on them, and those wiggly bodies. They move really, really easily at slow speeds. I can just lift and follow these baits in a river system just a few inches off the bottom, and all of a sudden a walleye will just smack it. They're great early season river baits. I typically don't use these when the water warms up and I want to move the baits quicker, because if you pull them really fast, the tail just kind of flattens out and planes out and they don't really move much. So early in the year, slow them down, use these really flexible ones. They work great. You know, as the season progresses and I want a little bit more aggressive bait, this one here is, again, the Berkley, the Champ Swimmer. I love this bait for straight retrieves, just casting it out and letting it swim over weed tops around rock piles. It's a great bait for a straight retrieve. If I want a more finessey style swim bait, or one that I want to jig more, I'm going to want a slimmer profile, more of a worm style paddle tail, like this Euro Tackle B-Vibe. And this is the 3-inch B-Vibe. It's got a smaller tail. It's going to have a little tight wiggle to it, not as much of a thump. And it's got that worm style tail with the ribs on it, so I can get some action up and down with it as well. And it's a great, great option for more finessey walleyes that aren't necessarily eating bigger baits. Now, if I want a bait that's really kind of an in-between where I can cast it and straight retrieve it or jig it, I really like the Kitech Swing Impact Fat. It's been a great swim bait for me, and this one has a little bit of tail wiggle to it as well as thump on the tail, and it's just a good all-around swim bait. And I can either chuck that out and just straight retrieve it, or I can jig it up and down and get a little bit of undulation out of it. So that's a great bait. The Eye Candy is just a good all-around bait as well. It's got a little smaller tail on it, a little lighter thump to it, but I can straight retrieve it or jig it as well. So that's kind of what you're looking for as far as techniques go. They're very simple. You literally almost can't fish a swim bait wrong. They're just a great all-around walleye bait. All right, now let's get into minnow baits. So there's 3 primary applications that I use minnow baits for. Number 1 is going to be snap jigging. So that's where we're going to hook it on a jig head, very straight, and we're just going to give it hard rips and pauses. Rip, pause, jerk, pause, and that minnow is going to dart back and forth, up and down, and it's going to have a very erratic action. This is for aggressive walleyes in the summertime. That's how I'm going to fish these minnow tail baits. Now, another great way to fish these is just on a jig head, same way you would rig it for snap jigging, but a much more twitchy retrieve. So I'm just going to pop, 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 and get that tail kind of swimming and hopping. And I'm going to fish it on a lighter jig head typically and impart a lot of the action to the tail just by twitching and hopping. Very much shorter strokes, not snapping it and making it dart all over, but just a little bit of wiggle as it swims through the water. That's a great way to work these as well. The third way I like to fish these minnow baits is on a drop shot rig, and I'm typically going to be using a smaller one, a much smaller size, so like a 2 to 3 inch, very thin profile minnow bait. The softer the plastic, the better, so I can get some good undulation out of it. And that's just going to be hovered above the bottom and given a little bit of twitches with the rod tip just to make it look like a shimmering small bait fish. And I can fish it in fairly deep water, even though it's a finesse presentation. And I'm often going to use this on deeper structure and when fish are targeting young of the year bait fish and they're not wanting to be quite as aggressive. So that's my typical 3 applications for the minnow baits. Now a straight tail worm, I am going to primarily use this either as a jig worm or as a drop shot. And I really like the shorter 4-inch straight tail worms for jig worm fishing. And jig worm fishing is basically very similar to curl tail fishing. I'm going to be adding more shakes though. So I want this to be undulating in the water and shimmying and shaking. And I'm going to be doing that with my rod tip as I move it through the water. I'm going to be giving it little hops, pops, shakes, shimmies. Just make that thing look like it's alive in the water. And then drop shot fishing, I'm more going to drag that weight over the bottom and get that undulating motion off the bottom with that bait. I really like to use thinner, very soft, longer worms for drop shot fishing, like this robo worm. That's been a great option for me for drop shot fishing. And it just gives that very leechy profile look when you're just dragging that weight and it's just going up and over the rocks. That bait's just swimming there and it looks really, really natural. So now jig worm fishing, I'm going to hop it a little bit more like I would a jig and minnow if I was using a live minnow. And it's got that short compact profile and it's very easy for walleyes to pounce on that bait and get it all in their mouth. And it looks like almost anything a walleye would eat. So those are kind of my 2 primary methods of fishing the straight tail worms. Now curl tail worms are very, very versatile. You can fish them fast, you can fish them slow, you can straight retrieve them. But my couple favorite methods are on a jig head, just fished like you would jig a live minnow. Just up and down, up off the bottom, let it fall, up off the bottom, let it fall. You know, swim it a little ways, let it fall back to bottom. And that bait is going to keep moving just like a minnow's tail would in almost any conditions. You can also crawl these across the bottom. They look really, really good that way. And if I go with a shorter grub, like a standard curl tail grub, I'll also sometimes straight retrieve these. They're a little bit less intrusive than a full paddle tail on a straight retrieve, but they also look like they're swimming with that tail spinning behind them. It's a little more subtle action on a straight retrieve than a paddle tail would be. So basically just straight jigging, a standard slow hop, or a straight retrieve is how I'm going to fish any of these curl tail grubs. Now, one other method I'll use in the river is basically the same exact retrieve I'll use on the paddle tail. And that is just a up and down, very, very slow, up and down fall, 12 inches at the most. Just get it off the bottom, back to bottom. And that works really, really well with these as well as the softer paddle tails. So that's my primary 3 retrieves with the curl tail. Well, I hope you guys are getting value out of this video. If you are, I'd really love it if you would subscribe to the channel. I got a ton more videos like this one, including that jig head breakdown that I left down below that you should definitely check out if you haven't already. And then if you purchase any of this stuff, I'd love it if you purchase through the links down below in the description, because that really helps me bring more videos to you guys like this one. So that said, I promised I would go over the most underrated plastic of all these, and I'm 100% sure that is the 4-inch jig worm. I have a 4-inch jig worm tied on almost all the time when I'm walleye fishing. You can hop it, you can rip it, you can drag it, you can swim it, you can do almost anything with that bait, and it just looks like walleye food. So get a 4-inch plastic worm, put it on a jig head, and just go fishing with it. I promise you it's going to catch walleyes. And this is a Billy Rub Baits 4-inch hot shot in Morning Dawn. This is absolutely one of my favorites for walleyes. It's just got that baitfish profile with that thicker midsection and then that longer tail. Wiggles and entices fish to bite. Great option. And again, I'm leaving links for this all below so you can pick them up. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm going to leave another video right here for you. Get hooked up.